All right, so I hesitated for a while on this one. I knew it was inevitable at some point, and I think I alluded to, and it might have been that video where I was responding to comments, where I said that I was afraid to do this one, and the main reason I was afraid to do it was because I didn't necessarily feel as passionate about them as the rest of the world does. And then it was like, well, you're the diehard Jack fan, so if I was going to do anything regarding Chinatown, surely it would be in one of these. On top of the fact that I think you always liked LA Confidential more than I did, also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there was that long stretch where Spacey was my favorite actor until certain circumstances, and you actually owned LA Confidential before I did.
Mm-hmm. Is he still in rehab?
He's making weird YouTube videos now, really like ominous, and he compared coronavirus to the downfall of his career in an interview. I don't know, it's weird, but
Oh man.
but we'll try to separate Jack Vincennes for a little bit, because Jack Vincennes is pretty much anything but all of that.
It's just a shame because he was so talented and so good in movies.
When I was looking back on it, it was like, think about the fact of where he was in the second half of the 90s. You've got LA Confidential is would it be hyperbole to say LA Confidential is considered one of the best movies ever made?
I think a lot of people definitely consider it a classic.
Yeah. It's certainly one of the most acclaimed movies of all time. And it was right in the middle of, he won an Oscar for The Usual Suspects.
Mm-hmm.
And then only 2 years later did this. And then 2 years after this, he won another Oscar.
Yeah.
And you throw Seven in there, that was his second half of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It was insane. And the thing is it's like, I don't know if it's because we're kind of on an LA Confidential kick here, but we're going to start with Chinatown eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of set it up. When you think about the star power of LA Confidential, it's interesting because Guy Pearce had Priscilla at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which everybody loves, and Russell Crowe, I'm not sure exactly where he was at the time, but it's like,
He had Virtuosity.
because he said in an interview not that long ago, I think with Jonathan Ross, where they were talking about how he went into the stratosphere with Gladiator.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that was true, but it kind of started with LA Confidential.
Yeah, because you had LA Confidential, and then if I remember my timeline correctly, I think The Insider was next, and then Gladiator, and then A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah, it was like this staircase of glory.
Mm-hmm.
But even though they weren't quite where they are now when the movie came out, to say the least, it still feels like the movie just has, and it's probably the setting as well, gives you this moment. But the movie just screams star power.
Yeah, because you got David Strathairn hiding out in there. You have an extremely young Simon Baker.
Yeah. DeVito, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Which, being LA Confidential, we're also summarizing the body count.
Yeah.
I forgot how large LA Confidential's body count is.
Yeah. And then we didn't even mention, of all this cast, the one that ended up taking the Oscar away was Singer.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is when you talk about star power, and you think of the whole LA Confidential cast, you look at Chinatown, and it has the equal amount of star power just with Nicholson alone.
Hey, don't count out Burt Young. Oh, this is Burt Young before Rocky, though.
Yeah, Dunaway, obviously Dunaway had Bonnie and Clyde 7 years before.
And don't forget John Huston.
Yeah. But as far as, like, calling out that, like, Nicholson is the sort of face of this movie despite everything else in it, to the point that, is he in every single scene? I think he is.
I think he would have to be, because he's kind of our narrator.
Yeah, because it's one of those
We only
cases
see things
where,
unfold as he does, which really helps with the mystery.
yeah, because that's how a lot of those old things played up. Where names we'll probably throw around a bit that are thrown around a lot when you talk about both these movies are Dashiell Hammett, who was like
Mm-hmm.
the sort of noir author, and is with his name you immediately associate it with the Maltese Falcon.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of started that whole thing, as far as I know, at least as far as noir getting influenced in the movies. And then after him was Raymond Chandler, who was most associated with The Big Sleep.
Hmm.
And that's where you can see like the character of Goodies comes from both those characters of Spade and Marlowe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the case most of the time with them also, where in those Bogart movies in particular, we saw the whole mystery through his eyes. And there's even moments where you can see like the camera kind of playing into that also, where it's like when he goes out into the yard for the first time and the pond is there,
Mm-hmm.
with the incriminating salt water in it, the way the camera's like over his shoulder and sort of following him. So it's like we're pretty much seeing it from his point of view, but also watching him in the moment at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool way to handle that. And also on top of this stuff where we're watching him just sort of follow people or watch people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like that sort of almost voyeuristic quality to it, where you see stuff like Rear Window or its fellow Best Picture nominee in The Singer of the Conversation.
Yeah.
Movies that are always able to kind of do that voyeuristic thing are ones that like me and I imagine a lot of people like really gravitate to, because that's the kind of, it's such a sort of simple way to be able to really suck an audience in when it kind of gives you that vibe that you're watching something you're maybe not supposed to.
Yeah.
Because it feels like there's a lot of that in here.
When you were mentioning people in it, we forgot to mention Bruce Glover.
Yeah. What was it? 3 years after Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it does just sort of start off as that whole classic noir thing that you like when you think of noir. The first thing you think of is private investigator in his office, and he's in the middle of a case. And then when that first case leaves, there's a mysterious woman smoking a cigarette and wearing a veil in his office to get him wrapped up in something. It's the ultimate like noir example, and that's exactly how this movie starts.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts just kind of going into Chinatown?
What do you mean just going into it?
Like, do you remember how you saw it the first time you saw it? Like what your feelings were when you first saw it?
I kind of didn't see the big deal. Actually, the first time I watched it, I was kind of bored with it.
Yeah. I was trying to. Okay, well, here's the thing: is when we talked about doing this video, I said that I was going to very closely rewatch the movies because I'm much more analytical now since I started doing this whole video thing.
I did the same thing. I usually have my phone up messing around while I'm rewatching something, and I have it almost kind of in the background. But with these movies, I put my phone away and like paid attention to like every detail. And it definitely sucks me in now more than it did before, even though I know the answer to the mystery.
Yeah, which
And I
is
think that helps too, because once you know the answer, then you go back and read. That's why mysteries are so fun to rewatch, because you can go back and start looking for clues.
yeah, they're really well done. It's like some mysteries might be like once you know what it is, the power's gone, but the ones that are really well done are like this.
Mm-hmm.
You see all those different things. I think the thing was, if we're going to do a little bit of comparison here to do the versus aspect of this,
Mm-hmm.
I do think the plot is not as enticing as something like LA Confidential,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like I know the movie is endlessly praised for people being sucked into it immediately, and I was talking about like that voyeuristic quality in particular, like when he's following Mulray around and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
at the start. But as far as the plot itself, I think that was the thing where there was a long time where I really wasn't that into this, the whole thing where it's using the water, and really all it comes down to is he wants to buy land cheap so that he can prosper from that.
It's the Lex Luthor plot.
Yeah. And it's like, compare that to LA Confidential, where it's like you start off with Mickey Cohen going to prison, And so it's like, who's going to fill that void? And then suddenly everybody starts getting off, and it's like the mystery is you're not just looking for one killer, you're looking for a small army that's hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
And it's like that's pretty crazy for a mystery. And you've got all the side aspects going on that are not so side about it. Like they're all going to tie in somehow. And that's the thing where you can say maybe the plot doesn't automatically hook you in Chinatown, but the inner developments of it are its strength.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with Chinatown, where it's more like it's not so much the plot that hooks you; it's the inner developments of it, like with the characters and like where they're, like what is their role in this, rather than the plot itself. Like what is John Huston doing with the land, etc.
And with that, with Chinatown, we only figure it out when Giddys does. Like
Yeah,
we're not given any extra information to get to the end result quicker than he is.
Which is a great technique when you look at scenes like the Orange Grove.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm going to go to the Orange Grove and I'm going to investigate the Orange Grove. And you're like, okay, this can't go wrong at all. And they start shooting at him immediately.
It's like, of all the places that he had been, that's where he was greeted the most life-threateningly.
And it was all a case of mistaking what he was there for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the strength comes from. Like I said, not so much the plot itself, but you could say, like I can see people being sucked in by that immediately also, especially since it's considered one of the greatest screenplays ever written.
Mm-hmm.
Like to the point that it's taught in film schools. And I do have to say something that I maybe am not so proud to say. That might have something to do also with my me kind of being I don't know about this movie for a while. Because as I've said, one or a million times before, I also write. And with movies like this, sometimes there'll be cases where I may or may not get script envy while watching them. And it tends to change my perspective a little bit. But at the same time, is there a better compliment I can pay it if I'm like literally jealous of its writing?
I don't think so.
So with Jack being your favorite actor, how do you feel about his performance here?
He's got a lot to do. Because he's got to solve the mystery, his interactions with different people. He's got to be kind of two-faced with people. He's got a lot cooking.
I think it's interesting that he's not the aggressive Nicholson that we kind of maybe expect going in.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since he's known for going so over the top, if need be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like he's actually like really calm for the most part, even when he's involved with like characters that would otherwise be really pushing him. The first person that comes to mind is the Hall of Records guy.
Yeah.
I feel like another Nicholson character would have knocked that dude's lights out just for existing.
Yeah, probably.
It's like that Hall of Records guy had no patience for no reason. But that was his way of getting back at him. Was it's like, all right, I'll just tear the page out then. It's like I'm getting the information I need, and I'm saying fuck you to that guy.
Yeah.
And it's only when we get to the scene where he starts slapping Evelyn that it feels like that's his response because that's his breaking point. And there's only like 20-something.
He's had all he could stand, and he can stand no more.
And that's the thing is there's like what, maybe half an hour, 20 minutes to a half an hour of the movie left by the time he reaches that point.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, with everything that's gone on, that sounds about right for a breaking point.
Yeah, he's put up with 2 hours of bullshit.
Yeah, because that's the thing about Evelyn's character especially. You can chalk up Dunaway's performance to this also. Obviously, both of them scored Oscar nominations. Was that Evelyn is this constant web Evelyn is such a constant web. She's not even her when we meet her.
No. Lie number one.
She starts as Diane Ladd, who ends up being another character entirely.
Yeah.
But then it's like, when we meet her, it's like, okay, what is her involvement in this? Turns into, what is her connection to her father? Turns into, did she kill her husband? Turns into, is she a love interest? Turns into, is she, holding her husband's mistress in some sort of hostage situation? Which turns into, oh, she has a sister we never knew about it. Oh, no, that's actually her daughter. But they're actually both at the same time because John Huston raped her.
Mhm.
Evelyn is an endless web with nearly every new scene she's in.
And with all of her deceit and everything that she worked for to build to that moment, John Huston still won.
Which is insane. But what's interesting is this movie got 11 Oscar nominations.
Mm-hmm.
It only won one of them. Because
Screenplay.
Yep. And both this and LA Confidential had the bad luck of, in any other year, they'd be the Oscar juggernaut, but they just happened to be up against a movie that both of them had to basically be, our nominations are participation trophies.
Yeah.
Because Chinatown wasn't beating Godfather 2 and LA Confidential wasn't beating Titanic. It just wasn't going to happen for either of them.
No.
But it did get that screenplay win, and the thing about it was, I find it interesting because obviously LA Confidential is based on the James Ellroy novel.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about, Hamnet and Chandler being all these inspirations as far as noir goes. It's almost kind of hard to believe that Chinatown's an original screenplay.
Yeah.
It just feels like an old story, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what it was back in the day, it was considered neo-noir because it came out in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But so much time has passed, and it has such a classic feel to it, whether it be production design or the way it's shot or the story or anything about it. It's sort of just gone back to regular noir when people think about it.
Yeah, it is kind of your classic gumshoe story.
Yeah, and the point I was going towards with the screenplay was apparently Robert Town had a happy ending in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm assuming would be Cross either getting, I would imagine not killed, probably just arrested. But
I don't know. They were building up how powerful and dangerous he was. Death might have been the only way.
Yeah, and Evelyn does get her chance to shoot him. It just doesn't do a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it was actually Polanski that intervened and said it should be a tragic ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they fought for a long time, and it wasn't until long after the fact the Town was like, yeah, Polanski made the right call. Because the thing, well, apparently the story goes was that he was still feeling very bleak after Sharon Tate's murder,
Mm-hmm.
which was only 5 years prior to this coming out. So he had just a general bleak outlook in the world, and was like, this is just the ending I'm feeling now, and I feel like I can't imagine it ending in another way.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the ending. So it's you can also get into the whole, as far as bleakness and Polanski's choices.
Mm-hmm.
It's the villain of the movie is somebody that raped a child. Yeah. So
and the end result is he gets to keep that child and raise it.
Oh God.
By the way, we also forgot to mention that James Hong is in this.
You redirected that conversation very well. It's like, man, you really opened up a can of worms there. And it's like,
thanks.
For some reason, that had not settled with me until you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh shit, oh fuck, Chinatown's ending, and all the way.
And I wonder if we didn't go with the ending that Polanski wanted, would we have had that "Forget It, Jake, it's Chinatown" line?
Yeah, it is one of those cases. I think it's also because we're so familiar with the tragic ending
Mm-hmm.
imagining it with a happy ending just feels stupid now. Like there's no way
Yeah.
to there's no way to imagine it succeeding because we know the tragic ending too well. But I do want to touch on John Huston. Apparently, John Huston
The
dabbled.
way he touched on Faye Dunaway. Oh.
Why? Why are you doing this? You are in the worst mood right now. These are the worst quips you could come up with. Or are they the best? So,
I don't know.
but talk about Huston. So of course, Huston dabbled in acting a little bit. Even he scored an Oscar nomination once for acting for The Cardinal, a big Otto Preminger movie.
You just described John Huston's approach to acting the way that somebody says that a kid tries at soccer, but he's not that great. He scored a goal, but
That's actually the point I was kind of getting at, was that he was never really pleased with himself as an actor.
mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, he said even with his Oscar nomination for The Cardinal, the only performance of his he was really that proud of was this one in Chinatown.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really want to talk
to be fair, he should be.
Yeah, I think I want to say he scored a Globe nomination for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about this, though, is I want to specifically talk about this first scene where he and Gittes have lunch. The tension in this scene, because you talk about, Polanski's real life playing into this. There's also a lot of Nicholson's real life that plays into this.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be the twist that somewhat happened in his real life, which I never knew about until you own one of his biographies,
Mm-hmm.
and you told me there's some interesting shit in that book.
Yeah, it's an interesting read. He's an interesting dude. I mean, look at him. He just looks like he would be interesting.
And what's the story with his? Is it his mom and sister, or what was it exactly?
He was raised believing that his mom was his sister and his grandmother was his mom.
So sort of the reverse of, somewhat similar to Catherine here. But there's also this first scene with Cross, where John, if I'm remembering the timeline of his life correctly, we have a scene where John Huston is somewhat interrogating Jack Nicholson about potentially banging his daughter.
Yeah.
And of course, Nicholson, was Angelica Huston his longest relationship ever?
I believe so. I think it was something like 12 years.
And wasn't it kind of starting when he and Huston would be doing this scene together? I was thinking I heard that.
I was thinking it was more late 70s, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've read the book.
But regardless, there's something here in this conversation that feels very real. But then there's more to it. There's some genuinely great tension they build up here. I love the idea, and I'm not even sure if this is necessarily intended to be tension. The fact that Cross always calls him Gitz instead of Gittes.
Mm-hmm.
And Gittes even corrects him twice in this scene.
Mm-hmm.
And he still calls him Gitz every single time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that alone once he corrects him a second time, your question is, how many times is he going to correct him, and how many times is it going to take for there to be some sort of breaking point here? Because it seems already tense as it is.
Plus, when you first meet him, you think he just keeps getting his name wrong because he's, forgetful old man. But as the movie goes on, you realize he does it with purpose.
Yeah, the shadier he is, the more you're like, oh, everything he does is calculated.
Yeah.
And then there's that moment where he says, when was the last time you saw Mulray?
Mm-hmm.
And just the back and forth, this is where the screenplay really comes in. And he pretends to not hear him. He starts talking about something out there.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, is Giddy's going to ask him again? Because if he asks him again, we're going to have tension.
Mm-hmm.
And not only does he ask him again, he straight up says, oh, by the way, I know that you talked to him. I know you had a fight. I know the location. And I have pictures to prove it.
He is done with his shit.
It's like you never quite know when he's going to pounce like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you also don't know how Cross is going to react because the tension is so well built in this scene.
Mm-hmm. And you know, he's at Cross's house. He's in the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
If Cross wanted him gone at that point, he'd be gone.
Yeah, because there's always, no matter how in control of a situation you are, there's a certain vulnerability if it's not your home turf.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's your opposing person's home turf, no matter how prepared you are, there's a certain vulnerability to you, and there's a certain control that person's going to have.
Which I feel like kind of translates for us, because whenever he's out and about, so many bad things happen. But I don't know about you, but whenever he goes back to his office, I'm like, okay, nothing bad's going to happen to him here. He's in his space. Like, he's got Bruce Glover there. He's going to be fine.
And then you also have moments where it manages to catch you off guard.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he's just out doing his thing, and then Polanski himself walks up to him, and before you have time to register and say, "Hey, that's Polanski," he is disfigured for the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you take an actor as recognizable as Nicholson in a role like this, and that you put this bandage on his face for a majority of the movie. I imagine 1974 audiences were really thrown off by that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also one more thing I wanted to mention about Houston real quick was how much Houston has influence. It's interesting how he just sort of dabbled in acting.
Mm-hmm.
Because this performance, usually they say Houston in general, but I feel like it's specifically this performance they're probably referring to.
Mm-hmm.
There are many actors that have borrowed Houston's voice for performances. From Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood being the most famous one, I think, to D'Onofrio said he used him in Men in Black.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I feel like when they say they use John Huston's voice, obviously he had a very recognizable voice, but I really can't help but think they're specifically referring to his performance in this movie when they do that. Because obviously, with those two examples, Day-Lewis and D'Onofrio, they're both playing characters that are extremely antagonistic.
Yeah.
Which may be putting Edgar mildly, but maybe Daniel Plainview mildly for that matter. But yeah, what you were talking about when it's like he's just kind of doing his thing. Another thing I love, and this goes to Nicholson's performance as well. It's kind of all of it. It's watching Giddys do his thing. It's Nicholson's performance. It's the writing. It's all of it. It's when he goes to the retirement home.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically plays the best game of I was just testing you in history. Like he perfected the I was just testing you excuse.
Yeah.
He still gets pretty much found out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can put the guy at the retirement home up there with the Hall of Records guy and the people he runs into that for some reason can't be beat. It's like he has to really weasel his way in and out in order to accomplish what he's doing here.
Which is funny because the big players, he does kind of get the upper hand, but with the little smaller players like that, he has to figure out a new route.
Because it's like, with Cross, he can say, I've got all this information on you. You can't bullshit me. I know what's going on here. And it's like he can barely get past the Hall of Records. he has to do the most blatant fake cough in history. It's like that's his only defense against the Hall of Records.
Mm-hmm. He essentially had to employ the method that people use to not be found out that they're farting in public. And you know what? Knowing Giddys, that's probably where he got the idea.
It reminds me of the scene with Ned in Spider-Man: Homecoming when he gets caught.
Hmm.
But instead of saying he was doing all the action stuff, he just says, "I was watching porn."
Hmm.
It's like when he's like coughs to steal the thing and rip it out of the book. It's like if he were to get caught, he would just say, "I'm sorry, I was farting." What a ridiculously childish conversation to have when we're talking about Chinatown, one of the most beloved. It's cited as one of the most sophisticated movies ever made. This is where we've taken the conversation. Yes, I am ashamed, but here we are.
I really enjoy watching some of his methods. Like how he uses the watch to figure out when Mulray left that building. That's really cool.
Yeah.
He must spend a fortune on watches, though.
Yeah.
Because if I remember right, his glove box was full.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing also where it's like we talk about how maybe the plot won't hook you as much as other movies of its type.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like the way the characters work and the way they fit into this web, and also the way those little like scenes in particular of them doing their thing are what really like enriching it in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of brings back to what I was trying to say earlier. So and yeah, then of course we've talked about the twist a few times now without talking about the fact that of all the ways this story unravels, like I said, especially trying to think as a 1974 audience member. Well, I remember seeing the movie for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and I was quite young, so it was like I couldn't really wrap my head around that whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like I hear what they're saying, but I don't know how could that be?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember exactly how old I was. Probably like 13 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an interesting thing trying to wrap my head around this movie at 13. That was probably too early, and that's probably why it kind of carried over for a while as a movie that I just couldn't quite get hooked on.
Mm-hmm. I think also when you watch it when you're younger, that almost feels tacked on. But then when you watch it when you're older, you realize all we're doing is just tying up every loose end in the movie.
Yeah, which is very, very close to what you could say to LA Confidential as well.
Yeah.
Because I remember one of my problems with LA Confidential for a long time was I thought it felt so incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is that I didn't realize and didn't appreciate was that it's intentionally seeming incoherent
Mm-hmm.
when everything is a piece. So it's like when it feels incoherent for a long time, that's pretty much the desired effect.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have no idea what's going to happen next. And it's almost a plus that it all ties together.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like they were able to do that, accomplish you having no idea what's going to happen next, without not only not being cheap, but being the opposite of cheap. They thought everything out.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there's even more going on in the book, and Helgeland like chopped it down, and that's what we see in the movie.
Hmm.
So it was even more plot heavy in the book, apparently, which I honestly can't even imagine.
Kind of makes me wonder if that would make for like a good miniseries.
Yeah, I think they tried to make it a series once, and they didn't get past the pilot.
Mm.
So I want to say Vincennes was Kiefer Sutherland, I think, but
I don't know.
that ended up not going anywhere. So yeah, that pretty much sums up Chinatown. I want to say, do you have anything else to add to Chinatown?
Do you think it deserves its classic status?
It's one of those cases where I don't know that it's a movie I'll ever like willingly see again and again and again and again and again and like really take it in for like this work of perfection, but it's like it's very easy to see why people feel that way. But
I think for its status, I think it definitely came out in the right decade.
yeah, like it's simultaneously feels very 30s, but also very 70s,
Yeah.
which is really weird. But they managed to pull that off.
Which is funny because LA Confidential is going to be in the 90s trying to feel like the 50s.
Yeah, and once again, manages to somehow pull off those.
Yeah,
So are we transitioning to LA Confidential?
I think so. So overall, your opinion of Chinatown is better than it used to be.
Yeah, but it's still it's. I was really hoping to like really get to latch onto it,
Hmm.
but it's still just more of a respect thing rather than something that I genuinely get caught up in. Even though, as you saw, I got caught up in it just talking about some of the scenes here, but the product as a whole doesn't hook me as much as I wish it did. But obviously, I'm in the very, very tiny minority. So
What is it about it that doesn't work for you? You talked about a lot of positives, but you didn't really go into the things that don't work for you.
I think really it just mainly comes back to what I talked about at the beginning, where it's like just something about the plot doesn't quite hook me in the way that, like I said, something like the setup that LA Confidential does. And I get that the setup is only the beginning of a story like this, especially with the way it unravels in all these different ways. Like I said, one character in particular with Evelyn is an entire movie's worth of
Hmm.
web, all unraveling and all of that.
Hmm.
But for some reason, I just don't. I don't know. Sometimes there's just those movies where you just kind of feel it when you watch it, and I feel like it's that more than anything else that makes you go back to the movies you go back to over and over and over again.
Hmm.
And it's like I said, I can admire the writing and how they put all the pieces together, and the fact that it's an original screenplay is something that it will. I mean, like I said, there's a perfection in how Helga managed to cut down Elra's novel, but there's something much more accomplished when it's its own thing. Like it comes straight from town and nowhere else, with just some vague, inspiration from other things. But that's about it. And it's not even necessarily. It's not. It's really just inspiration of style rather than anything else. But but yeah, there's just something about it that just doesn't quite hook me in the way something like I said, like the way you can immediately get hooked by LA Confidential when you see the narration by DeVito at the beginning while the opening credits are going on. And then it's all like the way it uses the opening credits to establish everything that's going on. When usually opening credits, you just kind of have to wait to go by or
Hmm.
their own thing. But they're using this moment at the beginning to tell you everything that's going on, and they have this really great way of showing you Mickey Cohen's going to prison. That there's now a void where he once was, and then the way they have the Hudgens character build that up and get you hyped up before the credits are even over by saying, "Who's gonna fill that void? We don't know." Exactly like a tabloid reporter, keeping you on the edge of your seat and wanting more of what he's selling
Hmm.
before we even get Curtis Hanson's credit. And it's like that's how you start something like this, and then we can just go right into it immediately. But even then, we don't really fully go into it immediately because the whole movie is separate pieces that are falling into place without us even realizing they're pieces that are falling into place. So, yeah. What do you think about how LA Confidential starts off?
It's definitely very stylized. Like, if I remember correctly, Mickey Cohen is the same character that Sean Penn played in Gangster Squad, right?
A much more fictionalized version, but weirdly, okay, how weird is this? Gangster Squad is so over the top. It's like comic booky Gangster Squad.
Hmm.
Yet somehow, and a lot of people don't like Gangster Squad. They say it got way out of control. Um, and LA Confidential is so expertly done. Yet somehow you can tell LA Confidential and Gangster Squad are in the same
Mm-hmm.
It's like, all right, I guess we're complimenting Ruben Fleischer more than Hansen right now, which is weird. But yeah. But yeah, so what you're basically saying is it's a movie that is as sophisticated as LA Confidential while having the flashiness of a movie that's a victim of its flashiness like Gangster Squad is.
Yeah. And then it's one of those movies where we just dive right in and just start going into, it's not really, it's expositional information, but I like how we see it unfolded. Like, we don't say, oh, Bud hates woman beaters or anything like that. We just see him address that issue. We don't hear that, Exley's kind of a nerd. As soon as we see him, we're like, oh, what a nerd.
What I love,
but he's also a nerd that knows what he's worth and knows what he wants.
Yeah.
He's like, when I used to watch this movie, I thought Exley was the most boring character, but now I find him one of the most interesting because I can't think of another movie where somebody is portrayed as a nerd, but is so direct in what they want and will do anything to get it.
Yeah, because it's like, because when we're introduced to White and Exley, we get two different things here. We get Bud sees the dude beating his wife through the window. So he goes up and he rips down the Christmas lights. And he brings the dude out and beats the shit out of him and says, I'm going to, tell people that you rape kids, and that's what I'm going to put you in prison for, and I'll let them deal with you. And then we see that he does that, and then there's that little moment where when the wife is leaving, he like moves the lights out of the way so she can get through. But he's very gentlemanly after what just happened. But then, and he seems like a good guy. I mean, very rough and violent, but because of what he did, he appears to be a good guy. But then when we cut to Exley and we see things through Exley's perspective, suddenly Bud does not look like a good guy. And there's that whole sort of ambiguous thing about who's on which side of which line through the whole movie. It's like there will be constantly things where we could have just been Exley was the straight arrow one and he's the one that wants to do everything right. And Bud's the one that's like really violent and over the top and doing a lot of stuff he shouldn't be doing. Like, for all the good Bud does, he should not have that job. And he like if he had like the consequences of what he's done, he would have long not had that job. But ultimately, it's for the case of like people doing what they do for the greater good. Whatever that happens to entail. And when we see Exley doing the same thing, he seems to be getting closer and closer to that line. But he's such a well-established character, and there's so many different layers to him. It makes perfect sense when he's getting so close to that line, but never quite crossing it. But getting so dangerously close the whole time. Where we think, is he going to become one of them or not? Is the question through the whole movie.
Then you've got Vincennes just hanging out here waiting for his next payoff.
Yeah, they're all three.
Which you could say the same about Vincennes is, it sounds he's taking payoffs. That's awful, but he's actually arresting people.
Yeah.
So like none of them are completely squeaky clean.
Yeah, because even Bud has those moments where like, I'm assuming it was more for like his partner's sake, but there's the moment during the brawl that they all get in trouble for. With what was it, the Mexicans?
Yeah.
And it's like there's the moment where Bud tries to like stop that from happening. Like he tries to get in the middle of it, but then he gets provoked, and then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
Or there's the moment when he thinks that Basinger is potentially trying to bribe him, and he aggressively rejects that bribe.
Yeah.
So it's like they
not to mention what he finds out once he sees the pictures that Sid Hutchins took.
It's like in that moment when he gets in the car, we're like, oh, so X is gonna die,
Mhm.
and it's gonna have nothing to do with
Even Cromwell is like, I wouldn't want to be Exley right now.
Yeah, and then you talk about that.
And then the cherry on top, when Bud arrives there, Exley's response, I'm glad you're here. I want to show you this.
He had no idea what was coming his way.
No.
That's the great thing too about Exley always being on that line is it's like we do see it like in full, like they fully spell it out. The very first scene he and Cromwell have together, and the very last scene he and Cromwell have together. The very first scene is him saying, you know, would you do all the dirty shit? With the list ending in, would you shoot somebody in the back?
Mm-hmm.
Which, when you're seeing a movie for the first time, comes back in a way you may not suspect in that moment.
No.
But then there's also the moments when he has like that moment when he's antagonizing Bud, and he's like, you know, Stenson got what he deserved, and you're going to also. And it's like that's what makes him different from the straight arrow character is he's willing to poke and prod like that also.
Yeah.
There's even the moment that's like, it just kind of feels like one picture. Like if you pause the frame, it is the perfect personification of corruption. It's the moment when Exley's, like when they're all saying goodbye to Stenson after he's been let go.
Mm-hmm.
And Exley's walking down the hallway with his box. And he's like, yep, I did that. And all the cops, like at the same time, just turn to look at him. And it's like this wall of like disapproving eyes looking at Exley.
Mm-hmm.
That's like corruption in a nutshell, that one shot.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk more about the unpredictability of the movie.
It does take a lot of twists and turns that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, because it almost seems cliche
Mm-hmm.
that one of the lines of the tagline of the movie is "Nothing is as it seems."
Mm-hmm.
But were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
The first thing I think of when I think of LA Confidential and Nothing is as it seems,
Mm-hmm.
apart from the corruption, obviously, is or how deep the corruption goes, I should say. Some of the corruption's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But how deep it goes is uncertain until a certain point. But I think of the moment when the massacre at the coffee shop, when he goes to the scene and it's like, oh, it's a coffee shop robbery. It looks like the Don Cheadle scene at the end of Boogie Nights.
Mm.
You've got, you know, a gunman dead, and you've got, you know, the person behind the counter dead. And it's like, oh, well, that sucks. And then you see the blood trail, and you go all the way back, and it is just that reveal of it being a room of bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that alone kind of sets up the whole Nothing is in the Scenes thing, whether it be the corruption, how deep it goes, or something as simple as what looks like a small crime scene is a massive crime scene.
Yeah. It goes from being labeled a robbery to a massacre.
Yeah. And like I said, that sort of stuff, like the more Exley sees, it seems like the colder he gets.
Mm-hmm.
Like the moment when, like I was talking about the way he and White really go after each other. And it's not one-sided. It's not like White going after him because of Stenson. It's Exley's pulling his weight in this rivalry here. Like there's the one moment when Stenson's dead, like on the slab.
Mm-hmm.
And White is standing right there, and Exley's response is, well, that's a hell of a way to avoid prison.
Yeah.
It's like, man, Exley wants to get his ass beat.
Well, what's funny, too, is you talk about Exley getting colder and colder. He actually ends up making a mistake, trying to be more like the other cops.
Yeah. But he's also got this way about him to where just when you think, like when he has those cold moments, it's like, will he get away from himself or not?
Mm-hmm.
You have moments like the interrogation scene, which is amazing.
Yeah.
When you see that's like when you look, like you said, when we first see Exley, your first thought is, what a nerd. But then it's like he takes those smarts that he has and
Mhm.
does it's almost like it's almost like he's taking book smart and using it for something that could be considered street smarts and how this interrogation is handled.
And the interrogation goes so well for him, he starts winning cops back over.
Yeah. And that's the great thing too, is kind of watching the rivalry between him and White and how there'll be moments where it seems like they could be getting closer, but then something else will happen, like sit up pictures, and then it'll seem like one is trying to kill the other, to where it's actually it could almost seem like a cheesy happy ending that they end up like doing the hand thing, and it's like, hey, it's all right, we banged the same woman, it's fine. But it's like the fact that we managed to get to that logically so soon after we were like, oh, White is going to kill him. Like, Exley's problem is no longer Cromwell and the other cops. Bud White will kill him.
Yeah.
But we
which is kind of alluded to because Cromwell advises him might just be best to stay away from him altogether.
Yeah. There's like so much foreshadowing in this movie that no matter how many times you see it, will still go under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
There's also talking about the unpredictability of it and talking about how, like, this is another case where it might almost seem, like, when I say incoherent, it might also seem episodic.
Mm-hmm.
Because the great thing about it is they really set up something with this Night Owl massacre.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get to the point where it's like, oh, these are the 3 Night Owl suspects. So we have this interrogation scene. And then it's like, and I always forget how action-packed the first half of the movie is also. There's a lot of, like, this happens, then this, one consecutively right after the other. And a lot of shootouts are involved in this also in the entire first half.
Mm-hmm.
And it only kind of slows down after the suspects are killed.
Yeah, it's a very exciting first half.
Yeah, and that's the thing also about the unpredictability is we set up, here's the Night Owl massacre, here's the suspects. And it's like, oh, okay, well, clearly they're probably not the killers because they've already been caught. So where does the movie go now? And then they escape. And then it's like, oh, shit, okay, shit's going down now. And then this pursuit happens, and they immediately get killed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, we had the Night Owl massacre. They were the suspects. They were killed. Where does the movie possibly go from here?
Mm-hmm.
And it just keeps having shit up its sleeve. Because those suspects look so guilty because they were guilty of another crime with the raping.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's a really ingenious move to have that, to have these guilty people who are not guilty for that. And then it's a whole other thing in the entire second half.
Mm-hmm. Which we probably never would have known about that because if Bud would have gotten his way and gone in and just beat him up, they probably would have just confessed to whatever just to get him to stop.
Yeah. It's like the way Exley made a dude, like Bud White goes into a room, he intimidates you, just his figure is just intimidating, and he'll beat the shit out of you or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He'll throw you in prison and call you a child molester to get you killed in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Exley, just by flipping a couple of switches, made a suspect piss himself. It's like they are certainly badass in their own individual ways.
Not to mention the fact, too, that we were talking about the different methods of doing things. You know, Bud didn't fold on his partner and is still in the same place he was. Actually ends up getting suspended for it. Partly for that, partly for his role in the fight. Exley gives all the details and gets promoted, and he uses that to his advantage twice.
It's like him getting like the Medal of Honor is basically like Forrest Gump meeting the president.
Like it's like you sit there and you watch Exley, you're like, yes, you should call out this officer for doing something shitty. But I don't know how you feel about using it to weasel in a promotion. Like it's like when I watch him, I'm so conflicted. I'm like, he's doing the right thing, but he's doing it in such a slimy way.
And isn't it great to have the straight arrow character be that conflicting?
Yeah, it
Like,
makes it a lot more interesting.
you just don't see that.
He even knows how to get Vincennes to play ball.
Yeah, we've been alluding to this whole time, but we might as well just flat out say it.
Mm-hmm.
How perfectly, how perfectly cast is this movie?
I'd
Like,
say it's pretty up there.
I can't imagine trading in any of these people in these particular parts.
Mm-hmm.
Even David Strathairn as Patchett is just perfect. Oh, before we go on to some other stuff, well, no, actually, there's kind of a segue here. I was talk about the different side, because we talk about the different sides of X-Loop we get to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's a sliminess to him, regardless of him doing the right thing and being a straight arrow character.
Mm-hmm.
What with Bud, we get to see the side of him when he falls for basing.
Mm-hmm.
We get to see him go watch Roman Holiday, be all romantic, spill his guts about why he beats the shit out of woman beaters in particular, because basically he sees the face of his father and the face of his mother on those people as it's happening.
Mm-hmm. We get to watch him realize that he could become that very easily.
Yeah, after the X-Loop pictures.
Yeah.
When he breaks that chair with just by squeezing it.
Yeah.
But yet Crow plays it so perfectly that it doesn't feel like, I feel like in another actor's hands or another writer's hands even, or director's hands, give everybody the credit.
Mm-hmm.
It would feel so drastically, like a drastic tonal change to see this side of when he's like facing.
Mm-hmm.
Yet somehow it works. Yeah, I think it's because we're kind of opening the doors on why he is that way, but it's not being too over dramatic about him revealing his backstory.
See, I think part of it too could be from the temptation that any other director might have cast like a brutish person in that role. And then to watch that brutish person just break down like that wouldn't be all that believable. But Russell Crowe is just brutish enough that you buy him in that role, but he also opens himself up to be vulnerable to where you can buy when he goes the other way.
Yeah, because it's
Russell Crowe's like the perfect medium for this role.
Yeah, yeah, because I think there's also a way that he plays up the violent scenes,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, oh, he hates woman beaters, end of story. You know, who doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
But it is also like, even before a backstory is revealed, it's almost like we can sense it coming from a personal place.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like he's so passionate about beating the shit out of woman beaters. Because most people want to do that on principle, but while there is principle, there's also a case of you can just tell it's coming from a place.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would have been almost like blue balls for him to not get at least a tiny bit of backstory to say, yeah, that's why. That's what. But the question I was going to ask you is a question I'm still not sure of after all the years of having seen this movie.
Okay.
That being bass singer is Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
Before she even won, her performance got a lot of acclaim in the reviews. And now the way it's sort of quietly commanding in that way of we're never quite sure what exactly her motives are.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, is she genuine with Bud, or where is that going? And then the scenes with Exley also. And she'll just have like one or two line deliveries here, just kind of speak for her character overall. Do you think it's Oscar-winning strength? I'm a little biased because she beat Julianne Moore for Boogie Nights, which is one of my favorite performances in the category ever. So, which is my second Boogie Nights reference, and like I'm going to tune out for some reason.
I mean, she does have a lot to play with because, like you said, we don't know her intentions, and the way that she portrays that, we never really know for sure what her intentions are until the very end of the movie.
Yeah. Which is so in line with so many of the other characters here also, with the way we're jumping back and forth on lines here.
Yeah, because even, like, what's brilliant about the ending, sorry, I have to adjust here, but Exley puts us in the same dilemma that he did in the first one. Exley's the hero. Like, we should be fully behind him. He stopped this whole plot. And what does he do? He lets the story get told that Cromwell was a hero so he can once again get promoted. It's like he does the right thing, but he just can't help himself. He can't help but be like, hey, shit went down. Time for me to get promoted. It's like it's in his DNA.
Well,
like, he always talks about how his dad was a cop. I wonder if his dad did the same thing. And that's what's it. Like, Exley has the story that you want him to succeed. But when he does, he's so about it that you just want to be like, all right, knock it off. Like, I'm happy for you, but seriously, shut the fuck up. It's like if your best friend, like, you love your best friend more than anything in the world, and the best thing in the world happened to him, and he just didn't shut up about it. Like, that's essentially what we're looking at here. Exley's the best friend that won the lottery and has talked about it for 3 months.
So what you really want is for Exley to have a character crossover with Leonard Shelby, so that he doesn't remember anything that's happened to him.
Pretty much. And he's very, like, for a character we're supposed to root for, he's very gloaty. Like, I mean, you could say it's a character arc and that he'll fix. No, he freaking doesn't. That medal he gets at the very end of the movie is because of the way he is. Because they're talking about how, like, it's going to tarnish the department forever, and it's going to, be a stain for the next few years. And they're like, we could write him as a hero, and then his response is just, well, you need to, and I'm right here.
Well, you want to talk about characters that are a bit full of themselves. Vincennes does have some interesting arcs here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the whole Simon Baker storyline is a very interesting direction to take his character.
Yeah.
Because you kind of don't expect it with the way their characters meet the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you think we're never going to see Simon Baker again.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is kind of how we start off that second half after the Night Owl Massacre is supposedly wrapped up. And you can kind of see, like, a sort of change in his character when he finds his body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like how this is kind of all about the whole, hey, let's take money from Sid Hudgens and we'll do this whole thing and that'll be great. And then it results in this, and then there's kind of a shift that happens.
Yeah, at the beginning, it's almost it's fun for Vincennes because he's like planning the shots. He's like, here, we'll get the movie premiere in the background while I'm arresting them. And then once Simon Baker's killed, like, he kind of goes into himself, and Exley has to bring him back out and be like, hey, why were you a cop in the first place?
Then we get scenes like the Lana Turner scene.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like this perfectly placed comedic scene with everything else that's been going on.
Yeah. It even kind of serves to kind of, like, humanize Exley a little bit, because Exley's so stick up his ass. And then when they get in the car and Vincennes is laughing, you think Exley's going to snap at him, and he just starts laughing too.
When Exley smiles like that, it almost feels like totally unnatural. Like, it's almost startling to see Exley like that happy for a second.
Yeah. Because normally the only time he's smiling is when he's being smug and getting his way.
You really have it out for Exley.
No, but I think that's what makes him such a great character, is he's the good guy. And, you can take, like, for example, Um, it'll be a wrestling analogy because that's all I know anymore. It's like I've just taken over Owen with the wrestling things. But like in wrestling, you have a baby face that's the good guy. And if he's just so bland, there's no investment to get. You're just like, oh yeah, he's supposed to win. He's the underdog, blah, 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 blah. Exley, on the other hand, would be a hell of a wrestling character because he is the good guy, but he's got so much slime and shit around him. Like, you want to see him win, but then immediately want to see him get comeuppance. Like, name any other character in a movie that you want to see get a comeuppance for winning that is not an outright villain.
I feel like there's examples, but none come to me right away, which proves your point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing also is this is another case of script envy.
Mm-hmm.
It's criticized a lot in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're writing, you really get a sense of this. It's a very difficult, like, it seems like it should be the easiest thing in the world. It should be step one, you would think.
Garth Pancake. Sorry, I had to throw that in. Anytime I hear easiest thing in the world, I think of Garth Pancake.
But you would think this would be step one, but it's hard. It is hard as fuck to write an interesting protagonist if you've got a lot of characters going on.
I think, once again, going back to, I think pro wrestling is proof of that.
That's why there's so many interesting villains or even anti-heroes.
Mm-hmm. That's like whenever we watch wrestling, who does Susan gravitate to? The heels. Every time. The heels are just more interesting.
Yeah, it's like what you were saying. Like, I never really thought about this until you really went into it. Just how fascinating Exley is, given his position in the story, but with the choices that he makes to get to that point.
Like, you could make the same argument for Giddies in Chinatown, but Giddies doesn't go to the lengths that Exley would. Giddies knows when to back off. Exley just keeps poking the bear. Like, I wanna somehow reform history and put Exley in that scene with Noah Cross the first time we meet Noah Cross. Like I said, when I first watched LA Confidential, Exley was the most boring to me, and then when I really watched and paid attention, he now by far to me is the most interesting character.
And every time this happens, I have the same thought.
Hmm.
What the hell were we watching that we didn't notice that right away?
I don't know.
But going on, coming back to Vincennes,
Mm-hmm.
obviously there's an inevitable scene we have to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Something we've been saying frequently in this video is LA Confidential is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Well, the first time I saw Pulp Fiction, which as you can see right behind me,
Mm-hmm.
Travolta walks out of the bathroom and Bruce Willis blows him away.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I saw that, I literally did not believe what I had just seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the scene kind of went on and I was like, was that Vincent? That had to have been another character because that's just not what would happen. It's the middle of the movie. It's John Travolta. That wouldn't happen. I must be mistaken. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Do you know the next time that happened? The next time I felt that way?
I'm going to guess it was the Vincennes.
It was like, okay, hold up. First off, how much time of the movie is left? Because unlike Pulp Fiction, LA Confidential is in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
Vincent came back. Spacey is in the foreground of the poster. along with bass singer.
He's first credited.
First credited. What the?
He was probably the biggest star at the time of the three.
Yeah. And that is such one of the most perfect twist reveals ever.
Not to mention the fact he's on his way up on the upswing of a character arc.
Yeah. And you're like, because usually that would be when the character dies.
Mm-hmm.
Not the fucking main character. When the side cop figures things out, he dies. It doesn't happen to Vincennes-like characters.
Okay, I have to have a sidebar question real quick. What death shocked you more when you first saw it? Vincent Vega, Jack Vincennes, or Billy Costigan?
Billy Costigan, it went out of my head while I was watching The Departed, but I had seen Infernal Affairs.
Ah.
So, like, in my subconscious knew Costigan was coming. Like I said, Vincent had the luxury of coming back because the movie's out of order.
Mm-hmm.
This movie wipes Vincennes from existence, but not only that, this is what I was getting at, was this is one of the most brilliant twist reveals ever, because we're getting hit with two giant pieces of what the fuck in one singular moment. Your mind has to say, holy shit, Vincennes just got shot. Holy shit, Vincennes is dying.
Mm-hmm.
While your brain is trying to register that it was Cromwell that shot him.
I think what really makes this work, too, is like Chinatown. We don't see anything that Giddys doesn't see. In this movie, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't see anything that Exley, White, or Vincennes don't see. One of them is in every scene.
Yeah, because that's what I was talking about, where our antagonists here are hiding in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it never quite pieces. But because the whole thing is, I feel like in another case, Cromwell being the villain would be cliche.
I think I know what really helps it too, because you would think, because Cromwell's doing, bad things all through the movie. He's driving out competition. We should be able to pick up that he's the villain, but we only see him with Bud White, and all we see is Bud White brooding. We don't see what's going on with him. We just focus on Bud White and his brooding, so we don't even see everything that Cromwell is doing while he's with White. White is so wrapped up in his own brooding that he probably saw clues that could have solved the movie an hour before.
Yeah, because the thing about that is, when I was talking about how in another movie, Cromwell being the villain would be a cliche.
Mm-hmm.
But we see all that stuff you were talking about. And they set up the whole thing of corruption and getting away with it and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It would not make sense thematically if Cromwell wasn't the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Dudley Smith is the main villain because he has to be. That's the only logical conclusion the story can come to.
Yeah.
And it sets up the whole thing. And here's something I'm embarrassed to talk about.
Wait a minute. Before you go, can I finish my point with White? I just only have one more thing to say. It's kind of foreshadowing because Bud White tells Lynn that he wants to be like Exley, but he's not smart enough. Had he been smarter, the time he was spending with Cromwell, he probably would have solved it right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this movie's just got so many interesting layers going on to it. And everything can be explained. Why didn't Bud know that it was Cromwell? He spent all of his time with him. Well, he was so busy wrapped up in himself and brooding, he didn't see any of it. And then later he tells us he's flat out not smart enough to get it.
Yeah.
Boom. That's explained.
Okay, so, and of course, and we're talking about thematically, of course, there's also the whole theme of the press's part in this.
Mm-hmm.
and how it's like after, because there's the whole connection with Sid Hudgens and Vincennes, and how these things just go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Now it goes into like the sensationalism of everything. And then there's even the point where when we reach the conclusion that we reach by the end, what's the first thing somebody says? The press will have a field day with this.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing I want to get to, the big thing I was not giving this movie credit for. When I talked about I wasn't crazy about this movie for a large portion of my life, one of its most brilliant aspects was something I was completely misunderstanding. Because here are the things that I didn't like about it before. I thought it seemed incoherent, which we already talked about. It's intentionally seeming coherent to throw you off because nothing is out of place. It is all the pieces of the same puzzle is what we're seeing at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it relied a little too much on coincidence, which kind of goes into what I'm talking about, but also in the case of everything is orchestrated in one way or another. And I also just thought it was kind of cheesy in general, how it was kind of the way it kind of handled the noir thing and the way it handled its twist, or not what the way it handled it, but what the twists and turns were, etc. But the reason I thought that was because of the Rollo Tomasi thing, which is one of the most brilliant aspects of the movie. And I took it in the wrong place for the longest time, and it was a big reason I didn't care for the movie. How dumb is that? Rollo Tomasi is the representation of the people that get away with it. Exley tells us this explicitly. He says, I gave the guy that killed my dad that name because he got away. And he is that name is the representation of the person that gets away with it, who could be anybody or for any reason. When I first saw the movie,
you thought Cromwell was his dad, didn't you? Or the guy that killed his dad, didn't you?
Young me took that literally to the point that I assumed that's what the twist was, and I immediately thought, that's dumb. That's dumb. It's cliche. It's, but then it's like when I realized that it's not that, and Cromwell is Rollo Tomasi because he gets away with it. It was like, oh shit. That's the most brilliant aspect of the movie, or one of them for sure. And the way Vincennes uses that in his dying breath. And it was like, oh, like Vincennes saying that with his dying breath, coming to the conclusion of, oh, that's who Cromwell is. He was the guy that killed his dad. I was like, that's so overdramatic and cheesy. But it's like Vincennes is saying that because he knows he's going to take that name to Exley, and Exley's going to be like, everything's going to fall into place. It's like, where has this movie been all my life? And why was child me the first one to see this movie instead of me now? Because I didn't even question that. Like, when that was in my mind the first time I saw the movie, it just stayed there. Like, it just somehow passed me by, despite how explicitly Exley explains this.
So what was your reaction when he started explaining it and you were watching it the most recent time and you were like, oh my God, I pegged this wrong?
Yeah, the first time, like before even the, reveal of Cromwell, it was like when he was explaining it the first time and he was like, it's just the name I give to the person that gets away with it. I was like, I fucked up.
You were like, I've seen this movie all wrong.
And then when he gets to that moment where Vincent
you're like the dude in a romantic comedy that gets mad because you see his girlfriend kissing a guy, but it's actually she's just kissing her brother on the cheek. And you broke off the relationship for it. That was you with this movie.
And like it got me when Exley just explained it the first time. And then when Vincent says we're Rollo Tomasi with this dying breath, it's like, Exley's going to know what that means. And then when it comes to the moment when Cromwell's standing over him and he says it again, he's like, "You're the one that gets away with it." It's like, this is one of the most profound things ever. And before I was watching it, going, "This is like, this is the most perfect way to catch a villain ever."
Yeah. Yeah. And had this genius way of tying it all together, and you were just like, nah, fuck it. He's not his dad. And they're not saying he killed his dad. That dude remains uncaught. Just like Russell Crowe's dad. They never catch him.
I wish this confession wasn't on camera, but it's better we own up to our mistakes, is it not?
One this big, you have to advertise.
What was that?
One this big, you have to advertise.
Yeah. So yeah, I like to think that I get LA Confidential now.
And how much has your opinion of it gone up now that you understand the one thing that pissed you off about it before?
I hope the way I'm explaining it is making that clear.
So has this graduated in your mind from an okay movie that had a dumb twist to a great movie?
It's pretty great. It's pretty great. And I'm so relieved because this happens a lot where I don't care for a movie that's beloved, and no matter how many times I watch it, I just can't change my mind, even though I badly want to. This was always one of those movies, and it finally happened.
And it was right in front of you the whole time. It was your antagonist hiding in plain sight.
Yes. So much shame. Whether it be making fart jokes about Jake Giddies to this, I'm just throwing out all the shame in this video.
But are you glad that you can enjoy this movie now the way everybody else enjoys it?
Yeah. And also, another moment I just remembered, that the Lana Turner scene is not the lone scene of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like the moment when the councilman is with Basinger when Bud shows up.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly, we don't know he's a councilman. It's revealed.
Yeah, it's the very last thing that's said.
It's like this whole exchange is funny enough, where he says, "Oh, do you want me to call your wife and have her come and get you?" After he tries to be tough to Bud White, which would have gone so well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's funny in itself. And then that final payoff of them walking by each other, and it's like, "Officer, councilman." It's like, oh. Like, it's this great, like, I feel like moments like that are the real reason it won adapted screenplay. But I love also the fact that it's like, when we talk about only seeing things from the perspective of our protagonists, whether it be Giddies or the three cops in LA Confidential,
Mm-hmm.
we just so rarely get proper mysteries anymore. Like this.
You mean mysteries that aren't figured out in the first 30 minutes?
Yeah, like
what was the one recently that I was like, I saw a trailer and I like, they were the villain, and you came back and you were like, yeah, you were correct on that.
The new Charlie Daniels.
Yeah,
it's where you can figure stuff out by just looking at a cast list.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is like, we have whodunits like Knives Out are still around, and Branagh keeping Agatha Christie alive. But mysteries like this are a different thing than a whodunit. That's kind of, because whodunits are typically like in one location, and it's like you got all the suspects in one place.
Mm-hmm.
But with here, like going like, all over these, towns and cities, and putting all these clues together, and being able to place all these puzzle pieces and all these different characters from all these different places and backgrounds. Where are those?
Yeah, because you have movies now. I think what's happened is movies have moved away from the mystery format where there's a puzzle to solve to just shocking twist, explain with coincidence.
Yeah, they're always way too eager to like show their hand nowadays.
Yeah.
I hate doing the whole where, what nowadays movies aren't like these. They don't make them like this now. I hate to be that guy.
But every once in a while, you have one like Knives Out that comes along, and you're like, yeah, that would fit in.
So, yeah. So as far as the two go, do you have anything else to add to LA Confidential? Any more hating on Exley you want to do?
No, I'm done. I'm done hating on Exley. Oh, but no, I do have one more thing I was going to mention. I was going to mention this a while ago. LA Confidential also has characters running around that think they're in on it that they're not. I'm looking at you, Sid Hudgens.
Sid Hudgens is like not Dean Keaton. Sid Hudgens is like Gabriel Byrne after The Usual Suspects, where he thought he was Kaiser Sose, and it turns out he's not.
Yeah.
So between the two, I think LA Confidential will be a movie that'll be much easier to come back to. Because like I said, it's more. Well, I really appreciate the way Chinatown is set up and its execution. Like I said, there's just something about it that doesn't quite hook me in the way that I can get hooked to LA Confidential really easily. And
now you can. Now the next time that you watch it, you'll be able to get hyped in the beginning. You'll be like, oh, there's not that stupid dumb twist I thought there was. It's brilliance coming my way.
And I can imagine people hearing me say that and just automatically assuming it's the flashiness.
Mm-hmm.
But no, there's, as far as, like I said, the setup to the whole thing, like the water and power thing, and somebody wants to buy land versus somebody is going to fill Mickey Cohen's void.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I said, but the only reason is because we've chosen to compare these two. Like in any other like situation, like if we were just talking normally outside of a video that was strictly talking about two movies, it wouldn't be much of a comparison to how these two movies are because they both got their individual style, but their styles.
It's funny that you say there's no comparison, but they both take place decades before they were made and involve corruption in Los Angeles.
I mean specifically like how they go into their story, like the plots, how they go into their stories. But yeah, clearly there's a reason we are comparing these two.
It's like with Chinatown, like there's only a certain amount of players that we're introduced to that can be involved. LA Confidential, it could be anybody. They even managed to find dirt on the district attorney that ends up paying off later and ties back to Vincenzo's crime that he was trying to solve.
Ron Rifkin's another great actor we never mentioned by name yet.
Yeah.
All right. You have anything else to add to sum up everything in general?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, I think we've both learned today that they're both really good movies. It's just a matter, I think, whoever prefers it's just going to depend on their personal taste.
That's how you can conclude every one of
these. Well, no, what I mean is, if you like slow burn, you're probably going to like Chinatown a little better. If you like a little more pizzazz, you're going to like LA Confidential better.
Yeah, which is interesting because in a way, you could, even though it's such an action-packed first half, you can say LA Confidential is slow burn, and the fact that all of the pieces don't fall together until like near the very end. And you can say that Chinatown has a certain flashiness by how it takes it looks like a movie that could have been made in its era. It just happens to it just happens to have been made in the 70s.
LA Confidential is weird in the fact that it doesn't become a slow burn until we're already halfway through the ride.
Yeah.
Like it gets all the excitement out of the way early, and then in the middle of the movie we decide, okay, we're going to build to this next part.
And it pays off.
Whereas Chinatown, I think, slowly builds as it goes. Like, for example, Chinatown is kind of shaped like this. I don't know how well you could tell it on the screen. but like it's a very gradual increase. And then once Faye Dunaway reveals who she is, it shoots up. And then LA Confidential kind of starts out like, and then it comes down and runs flat, and then it comes back up.
And they both have their. Would you say Vincennes getting shot is LA Confidential is My Sister, My Daughter moment?
Probably.
Where it just throws something at you, and there is so much to register that completely changes the story.
It's either that, or it's when Dudley asked Exley, "Hey, who's Rollo Tomasi?" And we all realize, oh, he done fucked up.
And both movies are perfect at not showing their hand too early.
No, you like, and I say it's one of those movies that you can go back and look for clues. There's movies like Knives Out's great and it's mystery, but once you know where the clues are, they're pretty blatant clues. This one, the clues aren't hanging out in plain sight. Like, you have to think about the clues. And you only get those clues if the character got those clues. Because otherwise, if you get that clue from something else that happens that doesn't involve another character, then you've cheated. If you get a clue for Exley's puzzle by watching Bud's scene, you're cheating because Exley never had that in front of him.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's. I mentioned that Chinatown got 11 nominations, and I mentioned LA Confidential got 9.
No, you hadn't mentioned that.
And
you did mention that they both only got 1.
LA Confidential got 2.
What else did it win?
They got a bass singer and adapted screenplay.
Oh, okay. You didn't mention earlier it got screenplay.
All right. We don't know what our next one is.
We don't know what, and we don't know when.
But we said we'll probably go back to comedy.
I mean, we don't have to. We can, but we don't have to.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to find out what we come up with, because I don't think we have. I think we've done most of the things we were planning.
I think so.
But there is, like I said, sometimes much to my dismay, verses can't die until I just quit. There's always going to be an option.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have to eventually stop.
Probably.
Hopefully.
But there's movies that I want to do that there's nothing to compare them with. Like, I would love to talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the World. There's just nothing to put with it.
Yeah.
Because you can't do something like Mortal Kombat or something like that because the tone's wrong.
Yeah, tonal differences make this really hard.
That's how I feel like that's how you know you have a unique movie.
Yeah.
Like, if you just look at it and you're like, I want to compare it to something, there's just nothing to compare it to. We had the same problem with the Back to the Future trilogy. We ended up just having to compare it to itself.
Yeah, or we get stuff like I had always wanted to do Dick Tracy, but I didn't know how. And then when we did our top 15 video, it's like, oh, finally.
But we'll get something figured out.
All right, and of course, you're gonna help me out a little bit with my Stephen King novella series, as far as I remember, and we're going to revisit a movie we've talked about a couple of times on this channel already. And we'll just go into that, but that'll be when October comes around. But yeah, as far as the next one of these, we'll just figure that out as we go. So, so if you don't have anything else to add, I think is that it?
I believe so.
All right.